I've heard them called unwieldy. I've heard them called unwearable. I've even heard them called unattractive. But no matter what anyone outside of the Casio Mudmaster bubble says to me about these watches, you can't convince me otherwise. These watches are indestructible, inimitably cool, and, quite simply, incredible. Recently, I had the chance to go hands-on with the brand new GWG2000 Mudmaster model. And today I have brought along two of the previous iterations from my own collection to explain some of the key differences. As we often say on Fratello, it is incredibly important to get watches on your wrist before you decide whether or not they are for you. If I had seen the 56mm diameter of this Casio Mudmaster that I bought almost 5 years ago, I certainly would not have added it to my collection. However, as soon as I tried it on, I realized that even on a 16.5cm wrist, the ergonomic shape of the case back and the lug shoulders made it more than wearable for me. What I'd like to focus on today the most is the evolution from the very first model, the GWG1000, launched in 2015, through the second, the GGB100, that came out in 2019, and the latest release, the GWG2000. Now, while you might think that this has been a continuous evolution, there have actually been some very interesting shifts between the three models. Let's start off by talking about the functionality of the GWG1000. If I were to list all of the functions you will find on the GWG1000 model, I would probably pass out because there's so many of them. So I'll just stick to my favorites. There's a stopwatch, a countdown timer, a world timer, a 5-alarm function. There is also a compass, a barometer, an altimeter, and a thermometer. There's a light activated by a button at 6 o'clock, glow-in-the-dark hands and indices, and additionally, it tells the time. Now, crucially, this model is radio controlled, so that time is always updated and accurate. Secondly, it's solar powered. Remember those two things because we're going to come back to those later. The next generation, otherwise known as GGB100, was released in 2019, and it made some very significant changes to the original design. I wouldn't call them direct updates because it shifted the whole focus of what the watch was for and what it could actually do. This is the model. Instead of being radio controlled and solar powered, it is battery driven and it also has Bluetooth connectivity. That means this watch will set its time via a connection to your smartphone. Now, for those of you like me that prefer to go into the wilderness and leave your trappings of modern life behind, this one's kind of useless because you have to take the smartphone with you to get all that data straight away from it. This one, however, can be worn wherever you like, and you don't need anything but a radio signal, which it will intermittently pick up a few times throughout the day. In my opinion, therefore, probably somewhat unsurprisingly, I would prefer the earlier iteration. But that's not so much of a surprise because it did cost twice as much as the follow-up. This was a bit of a seismic shift for Casio when the GGB100 did come out because it seemed to change the direction of a collection entirely. When it debuted, this model, the GWG1000, retailed for just under €700, which is a lot for a Casio G-Shock of any description. This one was €349 and seemed a relative bargain, especially given the more modern technology installed within it. There were more changes too. It wasn't just the technological side of things that shifted. In fact, perhaps the aesthetic changes were even more marked. So in this update, we have a mineral crystal instead of a sapphire crystal, and it is slightly domed, which gives the dial, which itself has been simplified, a bit more of a jewel-like presence. That's compounded by the fact it's surrounded by this carbon core guard inspired bezel, which looks very flashy and very attractive, but again is not really to my taste personally. That said, I did buy this model with my own money as soon as it came out because I was so interested to see the changes and to compare the two side by side. I can say, having been on many hikes with them both, with one on my wrist and one on my brother's, that the calibration of the two is almost identical. So you will get exactly the same readout as you would expect from these two modules. And there are some more aesthetic changes that should be noted. Firstly, we have these strap bars here. One says mud resist, one says shock resist. I actually like this addition. I think it's very attractive, and it also marries well with another change, which is the black plastic keeper, which moved away from the brushed metal keeper on the previous iteration. This is more high quality, shall we say, higher quality, whereas this one is perhaps a little more practical because it doesn't scratch up as much over time. Now, finally, we have a new case back design, which is actually based on the side of a jerry can, which has this kind of crosshair design, which is reputedly designed to lessen impacts sustained by jerry cans when in the back of a car. It changes from the metal caseback design of the GWG2000. I prefer this. I again feel this looks a little higher quality, and I also like the larger lug shoulders that you get on the earlier model. So, on to the new one, the GWG2000. Oftentimes when I'm telling stories on Fratello, I very much like to make out that my love for a watch wasn't instantaneous. Often I like to say that I found myself hating a watch first and then fell in love with it over time, because the connection that is sired through that process tends to be a little deeper. However, on this occasion I fell very hard as soon as I saw the GWG2000. It is a callback to the 1000 model that preceded it back in 2015, and it shares a lot more of its aesthetic DNA and also functional DNA with that model, acting almost as if this piece never existed. So the 2000 is clearly a direct descendant of this one, and so is its price tag. It comes in at 749 euros, which is the most expensive of the trio thus far. And for me, it does justify that money, but maybe not from the perspective you might expect. Technologically speaking, it is almost identical to the 1000, but with one significant change. So the module in the GWG1000 is the 5463, and the new module is the easy to remember 5678. They are functionally identical, but for one thing. Both have world time functions, both have 29 time zones, but the older model had 48 cities selectable, while the newer model only has 29. In all honesty, this change doesn't bother me at all. I use world time functions frequently when I'm traveling, and I've never been too precious about which city is chosen to represent whatever time zone it is I'm in. It is a little strange that the 5678 is, shall we say, simpler, but at least the setup is cleaner than its predecessor. Perhaps most interestingly though is the carbon core guard structure, which has been ported into the GWG line. The addition of a metal bezel and red accents around the case certainly give this model a sense of seriousness and luxury that makes it stand out amongst its peers. However, the big news is really the change in the dimensions of the new GWG2000. In comparison to its predecessor, it is slightly narrower. It comes down from 56.1 millimeters to 54.4. The big change really is the thickness. This model, the 1000, was 18 millimeters thick, and the new model, the 2000, is 16.1. While the 2000 is slightly longer with a 61.2 millimeter lug to lug as opposed to a 59.5, it has an enhanced carbon core drop off around the wrist, so it should fit even smaller wrists rather comfortably. But the big news is the weight has come down by 13 grams. So if you like a light watch, the new one is the one for you. So the big question is it worth it? Yes, the new GWG2000 is the most expensive model so far in this range, but it is, I think, the best. And yes, it is worth it. And yes, I will be buying it and adding it to my personal collection. So if that's the kind of endorsement that rings true with you, you're welcome. I've really enjoyed talking about these three models. I love them to pieces, and I can't wait to spend more time with the new 2000 because it will be accompanying me on many an adventure in the wild. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the subscribe button and leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.